Father doesn't want to see you in the hospital, my brother lied to me. But when I came anyway, Father pulled out a document from under his pillow that left my brother speechless. Rain drummed against the eaves, streaming down the window glass in winding paths. I sat at the kitchen table, mindlessly stirring long cold tea, when the phone rang. A number with a Chicago area code made me flinch. Calls from my hometown rarely brought good news. I took a deep breath and pressed the answer button. Hello? Lisa, dear, this is Helen Daniels. The voice of my parents' neighbor sounded muffled, as if she was trying to speak quietly. I thought you should know. Your father is in the hospital. He had a heart attack last night. The cup slipped from my fingers, hitting the wooden tabletop with a dull thud. Hot tea spread across the surface, but I didn't pay attention to it. I felt the floor sway beneath my feet. My fingers gripped the phone so tightly that my knuckles turned white. What? How is he? How serious is it? My voice betrayed me with a tremor. I bit my lip, trying to calm down. My father and I hadn't spoken in over 4 years, but the thought that I might lose him burned with sudden pain. I don't know the details, dear. Mark was with him at the hospital. I saw the ambulance take your father away, and this morning I stopped by to check on him. He looked weak, but conscious. Mark. My brother surely knows more. But why didn't he call me? Which hospital is he at? Memorial, the one downtown. Room 347, if I'm not mistaken. Thank you, Mrs. Daniels. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Thank you for letting me know. Of course, dear. Your father, despite everything, is a good man. I remember how you grew up in that house. Family should be together at times like this. Family. The word echoed with a dull pain somewhere under my ribs. How long had it been since I considered myself part of the Clark family? After hanging up, I first wiped up the spilled tea, mechanically performing this simple action to somehow collect my thoughts. Then I dialed my brother's number. Mark answered almost immediately, and from his tone, I understood that the conversation would be difficult. Mark, Mrs. Daniels just called me. What's wrong with Dad? A brief silence, then a sigh. I could almost see him rubbing his nose bridge, a gesture Mark had inherited from Father when he was displeased or upset. Heart attack, pretty severe. The doctors say he needs observation and possibly surgery. I'll fly out today. You shouldn't travel across the country, Lisa. Mark's voice became harder. Father doesn't want to see you. He said so directly. You know how he feels about you not coming back when Mom was dying. These words hit harder than I expected. Something inside seemed to snap. I went out onto the small balcony of my Portland apartment, looking at the rain-blurred cityscape. Drops pounded on the metal awning, creating a rhythmic background noise in which my thoughts drowned. 4 years had passed, and the wound still bled. I couldn't come to my dying mother because of pregnancy complications and strict bed rest. Mom died without seeing me one last time, and a week after the funeral, which I still flew to despite doctor's orders, I lost the baby. Double loss, double pain. Father was then immersed in his own grief. We barely spoke. He only nodded coldly at me at the funeral, standing straight as a rod in his perfectly pressed black suit. And when he learned about the miscarriage, he sent a short formal card with condolences, as if to a distant acquaintance, not his own daughter. The card was still kept in a dresser drawer. I couldn't throw it away, though every time I came across it while cleaning, I felt everything inside contract with hurt. With deep regret, I learned of your loss. Sincere condolences. Your father, not Dad. Your father. As if there was not a family bond between us, but some formal relationship. Childhood memories surfaced. Father, a former military man with impeccable posture and stern gaze, always favored Mark. A man must be strong. A man is the pillar of the family. These phrases sounded constantly, shaping Mark in Father's image and likeness. Mother and I were assigned secondary roles in this small militarized world, to support, admire, not interfere. Mark and I are only a year apart in age. He's just a year older, but that year in childhood seemed like a huge chasm. Mark could go fishing with Father. I couldn't. Fishing is a man's business. For his 16th birthday, Father gave Mark a used car that they restored together in the garage. For my 16th, a silver bracelet that I still wear, but only because Mom chose it. But Mom was always my quiet harbor, my protector. When I decided not to follow in the footsteps of father and brother, who studied business and law, but to become a teacher, Mom stood by my side, softening Father's anger. When I announced that I was moving to Portland, thousands of miles from family, Mom cried all night, but in the morning helped me pack. "You must live your life, not ours," she said then, and we both knew she meant her own story. Susan Clark, my mother, was a promising pianist, but gave up her musical career when she married my father, then a young lieutenant. She never complained, at least not out loud, but sometimes I caught her late at night at the piano, playing quietly, almost soundlessly, with closed eyes, and such an expression of longing on her face that my heart squeezed. And now she's gone, and the only thread connecting me to my childhood home had snapped. After Mother's death, Mark completely took over caring for Father and managing the family estate, including the small furniture store Clark & Sons, founded by our grandfather and always Father's pride. Having worked in the store since his teens, Mark seemed created for the role of heir. But shortly before her death, Mom mentioned in a phone conversation with me that she wanted part of the business to go to me too, despite my move. "You've always felt beauty and harmony, dear," she said then. "Your design eye would benefit the store." I didn't attach much importance to this. The notorious furniture store was never the center of my universe, like it was for Father and Mark. I shook off the memories, returned to the apartment, and poured myself a glass of wine. Mark's words echoed in my head. "Father doesn't want to see me." It was painful, but not surprising. Since I left Chicago, our relationship had become strained, and after Mom's death, had turned into rare exchanges of formalities on holidays. I tried to establish contact, wrote letters. In an age of messengers and video calls, this seemed more sincere, but I received no replies. The phone rang again, making me flinch. Helen Daniels again. "Lisa, I just came from the hospital. I stopped by to see your father again. Brought him homemade blueberry pie. He always loved my baking." Her voice sounded excited. "You know, he was asking about you." I froze with the glass in my hand, feeling my heart begin to beat faster. "Asking about me? Are you sure?" "Absolutely sure, dear. Moreover, I accidentally heard him telling the doctor that he wants to see you. He even asked if he could call you from the hospital. I don't know what Mark told you, but I think your father very much wants to see you." I pressed my lips together, trying to process what I heard. Mrs. Daniels had always been a kind woman, but sometimes inclined to embellish reality. And yet, what if she's right? What if Mark lied to me? "He's quite weak," she continued, "but his mind is clear. You know what he told me when I was adjusting his pillow? Helen, she's just like Susan in her youth, my Lisa. The same eyes, the same look. I think he's very upset about your estrangement." I nearly dropped the glass. Father never, even in better times, was talkative, and certainly didn't share feelings with anyone except perhaps Mom. After hanging up, I stared at one point for a long time. Father wants to see me, but Mark claims otherwise. Who to believe? And why would Mark lie to me? I dialed my ex-husband's number. David didn't answer immediately. I could hear him talking to someone before addressing me. "Lisa, is everything all right?" Here's someone who never started a conversation with greetings. Straight to the point, that was all David, and yet I felt a pang of warmth hearing his voice. Despite our divorce 2 years ago, we maintained good relations. "Father's in the hospital. Heart attack." "Oh God, I'm so sorry. Is he okay?" I heard genuine concern in his voice. David never got along with my father. 2 strong men, too different in everything from political views to attitude toward life, yet he always treated him with respect. "I don't know. Mark says it's serious, but he also said Father doesn't want to see me, while the neighbor claims otherwise." David was silent. I heard his breathing, imagining him frowning. that familiar wrinkle between his eyebrows that always appeared when he was thinking hard. After your mother's funeral, you often said you never got to tell her the most important things, that it weighs on you. Maybe this is your last chance not to repeat the same mistake with your father. I closed my eyes. David always knew how to get to the heart of the matter. This was one of his talents, seeing the core of a problem, discarding everything unnecessary, and at the same time, one of the reasons our marriage didn't survive the test of time. Sometimes I missed those unnecessary emotions and sentiments that for David were always obstacles. You're right, I have to go. I'll send you money for a ticket if you need it. No need, I'll manage, but thank you, David. I smiled, looking at the screen of the dead phone. It was at moments like these that I understood why I once fell in love with this man, and why, despite the divorce, he remained one of the closest people to me. After a sleepless night filled with searching for flights and packing, in the morning I was already at the airport. Portland saw me off with drizzling rain and fog that enveloped the downtown skyscrapers. I love this city, its relaxed atmosphere, parks, narrow streets with unique restaurants and shops, its unhurried pace of life. Moving here 6 years ago was one of the best decisions of my life. Although it cost me my relationship with Father, the 3-hour flight to Chicago seemed endless. I looked out the window at fields and cities floating below, trying to imagine the upcoming meeting with Father. What would I say to him after so many years of silence? And what would he say? Part of me still feared that Mark was right, and Father really didn't want to see me. From the airport, I took a taxi straight to my parents' house in suburban Chicago. I needed to change clothes and leave my things before visiting the hospital. Getting out of the car, I was surprised to notice how the house had changed. The once perfectly maintained military-style property looked neglected, the lawn uncut, paint peeling on the porch, autumn leaves uncollected, the mailbox overflowing. Maybe Father just didn't have time to take care of this, I thought, but an inner voice objected. Jack Clark would never allow his house to look untidy, even if he were dying. Order and discipline were his second nature. I took out the spare key I always kept in my wallet. Father insisted that every family member have their own key for any emergency. The key had lain in a small compartment of my wallet all these years, almost forgotten. I never thought I'd have to use it. Inside, the house also looked different, and from the first step, I felt something was wrong. Usually, immaculately clean rooms were covered with a thin layer of dust. In the living room stood a couple of dirty cups. In the kitchen sink, unwashed dishes on the coffee table, scattered newspapers and bills. The kitchen window was ajar, and a draft ruffled the curtain. This was so unlike the house where I grew up that for a moment I thought I was in the wrong place. Jack Clark, former Navy petty officer who had forever absorbed military discipline, would never allow such disorder. Even after Mom's death, as far as I could judge from rare visits, the house remained crystal clean. I closed the window and went to the living room. The photographs on the mantelpiece were covered with a thin layer of dust, but they stood in the same places as before. My parents' wedding photo, Mark and I in graduation gowns, Father in naval uniform on a ship's deck. I went upstairs and stopped at the door of Mom's room. After her death, Father couldn't sleep in their shared bedroom and moved to the guest room, keeping Mom's room untouched. I remembered this from brief conversations with Mark. My breath caught when I opened the door. Everything remained exactly as I remembered. Mom's old vanity with perfume bottles, a bed with a patchwork quilt she made herself, a bookshelf with worn favorite novels. Time seemed to have stopped in this room. On the bedside table, a photograph of my parents, Father in military uniform hugging Mom on the day of his promotion, her smile, so alive, so real. He looks at her with adoration that was so rarely shown in public. Next to it lay an unfinished book with a bookmark. Mom always read several books at once, saying that different books are for different moods. I carefully took the book. A small envelope slipped from the pages, with my name written in Mom's handwriting. With trembling fingers, I opened it. "Dear Lisa, if you're reading this, I'm already gone. I would have liked to tell you this in person, but time is running out. Forgive me for not being able to protect your right to your own life, your own decisions. You were always the bravest of us, not afraid to leave and create something of your own. I'm proud of you and will always love you, wherever you are. Remember, family is not chains, but wings. Use yours. Tears streamed down my cheeks. I pressed the letter to my chest, trying to cope with the wave of grief and guilt that washed over me. 4 years had passed, and it felt like Mom had left only yesterday. And now I find this letter that she left for me, knowing she was leaving. A letter I should have read much earlier. Why didn't anyone tell me about it? Or did Father not know himself? I wasn't used to crying in front of people, always restrained emotions, had too well absorbed Father's lessons. But now, in the empty house, alone with Mom's message, I let the tears flow. Over all these years, I grieved in snatches, alone, trying to be strong. Now I was covered by an avalanche of unwept grief and guilt, as if Mom's letter gave permission to finally let go of these feelings. I don't know how long I sat on the edge of Mom's bed, clutching this letter. When the tears finally dried up, I felt a strange relief, as if the heavy burden I had carried all these years had become a little lighter. I carefully put the letter in the inner pocket of my jacket, close to my heart. After wiping away tears, I went to the living room. On the mantelpiece, photographs in frames lined up in a row. The Clark Family Chronicle. Many photos of Mark. Here he receives an award for success in football, Father's favorite sport. Here he and Father stand with identical medals at shooting competitions. In the place of honor, a photo where the president of the local Chamber of Commerce presents Mark and Father with the Family Business of the Year award. There were no photos of me as an adult, only a few childhood snapshots lost among Mark's triumphs, as if for Father, I had ceased to exist after high school, or rather, after leaving Chicago. I suppressed a pang of hurt, reminding myself that now was not the time for old wounds. I went into Father's study, the holy of holies of our house, where as children we were only allowed with special permission. Don't disturb Father while he's working. How many times had I heard this from Mom when I tried to penetrate this room with its large oak desk and shelves full of books, most of which were military memoirs or history books, probably hundreds. Here was even more disorder than in the rest of the house. Papers on the desk, folders on the floor, as if someone had been hastily searching for some documents. One of the desk drawers was ajar. On the back of the leather chair hung Mark's jacket. I recognized it by the distinctive pin on the lapel, a gift from our Uncle Fred for graduating college. So my brother had been here recently. I carefully moved the papers on the desk. Some bills, bank statements, store documents. Nothing special, but why would Mark need to rummage through them so hastily? In the top drawer of the desk, where I looked for a pen to write down the hospital coordinates, I found envelopes with my handwriting, unopened letters with my return address. For the last 4 years, I had written to Father every month, trying to maintain at least some connection. He didn't even open them. I sighed, not to say this was unexpected, but it still hurt. Next to the drawer on the desk lay a stack of my old school notebooks with A's that Mom had carefully kept. Why were they here and not in her room? I flipped through one of the notebooks, old literature essays with teacher's notes. Excellent analysis, Lisa. Deep thoughts on human nature. Even in 8th grade, I was more interested in books and art than the practical sciences Father preferred. In one of the notebooks, the oldest one, I found an inserted sheet. A colored pencil drawing depicting furniture of strange, fantastical shapes. On the back, in childish handwriting, was written, "When I grow up, I'll make such chairs and tables. I'll give them to Dad and Mom," and a date. I was 9 years old then. I vaguely remembered drawing these whimsical objects, imagining a house of the future. Why did Father keep this drawing in his study? I began sorting through the mail piled on the desk, bringing at least some order, and found several notices from the bank with warnings about overdue payments on a business loan taken to expand the family store. Judging by the dates, problems had started more than a year ago. Several envelopes had stickers attached with Mark's handwriting, "Hide from Dad." This alarmed me. I approached Father's old safe, hidden behind a painting of a naval ship. The combination hadn't changed since childhood, Mom's birthday. I remembered how I once peeked when Father opened the safe to get some documents. He didn't know I saw, and I never admitted to it, considering it my little secret. Observation was always valued among the Clarks. I entered the combination, feeling a little guilty. After all, I was invading Father's personal space. But intuition suggested something was wrong, and I needed to understand what exactly. Inside, I found a folder with the store's financial documents. A quick glance was enough to understand. Business was going catastrophically badly. In the last column of the income table, negative numbers were written in red ink next to each month of the last year. The amounts were impressive. How was this possible? Clark & Sons was a profitable business with regular customers and a good reputation. Competition had certainly increased with the emergence of chain stores, but before I left, the financial situation was stable. What had happened in these years? I flipped through other documents in the folder and found strange statements about transfers of large sums to accounts that had nothing to do with suppliers or usual store expenses. Next to several such transactions were Father's notes. Component placement, check, and even mark? Deep in the safe lay another folder labeled simply L. My first letter. Inside, I found copies of all the letters I had written to Father over the past 4 years. Those same letters whose unopened originals lay in the desk drawer. But how could they be here as copies if Father didn't open the envelopes? Suddenly, I understood. Someone was intercepting my letters, making copies and hiding the originals. But why? I closed the safe, feeling that during my absence, much more had changed in the family than I could have imagined. Without a moment's doubt about who was behind these oddities, I slammed the safe shut and headed to the hospital to see Father, feeling growing anxiety. Memorial Hospital, Chicago, a huge building of glass and concrete, always evoked mixed feelings in me. I was born here, came here to visit my dying mother, lost a child here. And here I am again, walking down long corridors, looking for room 347. The hospital smell, a mixture of disinfectants, medicines, and some special sterility, brought me back to those days when I sat for hours by Mom's bedside, watching her life inexorably fade. Pancreatic cancer, a merciless diagnosis that left little hope. Then I also walked these corridors, clutching a cup of tasteless coffee from a vending machine, trying not to think that I would soon be without the closest person in my life. I shook my head, driving away memories. No time to indulge in sadness. I'm here for Father. On the 3rd floor, at the nurse's station, I saw a familiar figure. Mark was talking to an elderly doctor, gesticulating energetically. Noticing me, he froze for a moment, and I clearly saw on his face an expression of shock and fear. This was so unlike my usually confident brother that I slowed my step for a second. "Lisa?" He quickly said goodbye to the doctor and headed toward me. "What the hell? I clearly said you didn't need to come." I noticed my brother's expensive suit, new Rolex watch, and BMW keys he was nervously twirling in his hands. Strange attributes for the owner of a failing store. Something definitely didn't add up here. "I have the right to visit my father, Mark, especially since Mrs. Daniels said he was asking about me." "That old gossip always stuck her nose where it didn't belong," Mark snorted. "Father is too weak for visits, especially emotional ones. You'll only upset him, as always." I looked carefully at my brother. Under his outward confidence, I noticed nervousness. He blinked frequently and avoided direct eye contact, sure signs that Mark wasn't telling the whole truth. I knew these peculiarities of his too well from childhood when he tried to wriggle out of breaking Mom's favorite vase or getting a D in algebra. "How are things at the store?" I asked, changing the subject. Judging by the documents I saw, not very well. Mark paled but quickly composed himself. One hand involuntarily jerked to his tie knot, adjusting it. Another telltale gesture I remembered from childhood. You were snooping through Dad's papers, always were too curious for your own good. These are temporary difficulties. I've attracted investors and will soon bring the business to a new level. Dad has nothing to worry about, so I didn't tell him about the problems. He spoke too quickly and loudly, a clear sign he was nervous. I remembered a recent publication in the local newspaper that I had accidentally seen online while searching for information about my hometown before the trip. A new elite residential complex in suburban Chicago, where Mark was presented as an investor and co-owner. The newspaper mentioned sums in the millions. Where would the owner of a small family store get such money? Do these investors of yours know that the store is on the verge of bankruptcy? Or that you're using Father's real estate as collateral for your projects? Mark's gaze became cold and his jaw tensed. He always reacted this way when he felt cornered. Don't meddle in affairs you don't understand, Lisa. You ran away from the family to build your life. Fine, I respect your choice, but I took on the care of Father and the business, and you have no right to come back now and question everything. His words stung me, hitting right on target. I really had left, abandoning them both. I had reasons for that, but did they justify my practically disappearing from their lives? Doubts pricked me, but I pushed them away. Now was not the time for self-flagellation. I just want to see Father, Mark. Step aside. Without waiting for an answer, I walked around my brother and headed toward room 347. I heard him curse behind me, but didn't turn around. The door to the room was ajar. I froze on the threshold, taking a deep breath. What would I say to Father after so many years of silence? Would he forgive me? And could I forgive him? Finally, gathering my courage, I pushed the door and entered. Father lay on the hospital bed, connected to monitors. Jack Clark, once a strong man with military bearing, always holding himself straight with his head held high, looked gaunt and aged. His skin had acquired a yellowish tinge, and his always neatly trimmed hair was disheveled and seemed thinner than I remembered. His eyes were closed, his chest barely noticeably rising and falling in rhythm with his breathing. I quietly approached the bed, afraid to wake him. But as if sensing my presence, Father opened his eyes. When he saw me, his face froze for a moment, and I prepared for a cold reception or even anger. But then his gaze softened, and to my surprise, tears appeared in his eyes. "Lisa?" His voice was weak, hoarse, completely unlike the commanding tone he usually spoke with. "You came." These simple words, spoken with such obvious relief, stuck in my throat like a lump. I approached the bed, not knowing what to say. 4 years of silence, 4 years of hurt and things left unsaid, and here we are. He confined to a hospital bed, I finally finding the courage to return. "Of course I came. How are you?" A banal question, but I couldn't think of anything better. "I've been better," a weak smile touched his lips. "But now that you're here, much better." I swallowed the lump in my throat. So much had accumulated, so much needed to be said, but words stuck somewhere between heart and lips. Father smiled weakly and gestured for me to come closer. When I took his hand, so cold and fragile, with protruding veins, he struggled, and looking toward the door as if afraid we might be caught, felt for something under his pillow and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. "Take this," he whispered. "Quickly." His wariness was transmitted to me. I hid the paper in my jacket pocket just as Mark entered the room. Seeing Father and me holding hands, his face changed. "Dad, you need to rest. No excitement." He approached the bed from the other side. "The doctor said you need complete rest." "I'm not a porcelain doll, son," Father grumbled, and for a moment I recognized the former Jack Clark in him, stubborn, unbending. "I want to talk to my daughter." Mark pressed his lips together but didn't argue. Instead, he addressed me. "Don't tire him out. He had a serious attack. And don't you dare ask him about company business. For him, it's just additional stress." I nodded, not wanting to start a fight at the bedside of my sick father. Mark cast another wary glance at me and left the room, leaving the door ajar. "Is he always so caring?" I asked with light irony when my brother's footsteps faded in the corridor. Ever since I started asking uncomfortable questions about finances, Father answered quietly. Read the document, but not here, at home, and don't show it to anyone, especially Mark. I looked at Father uncomprehendingly, but didn't ask questions. Instead, I told him about my life in Portland, about work at school, about new friends, avoiding painful topics, and not mentioning what I found in his study. Father listened attentively, occasionally asking questions as if he was really interested in my life. This was so unlike our former detachment that I caught myself thinking several times, what if we had always talked like this? Could we have avoided so many years of estrangement? After half an hour, Father began to tire. His eyelids grew heavy. I was about to leave, but he held my hand. "Don't trust him, Lisa," he whispered, already falling asleep. "Whatever he says, check for yourself." I left the room feeling a strange mixture of relief and anxiety. Relief, because Father met me not with coldness, as I feared, but with warmth and even some hope. And anxiety, because of his strange behavior, the mysterious document, and warnings against Mark. In the corridor, I encountered Mark, who was talking to a doctor, a young man in glasses with an attentive gaze. "Ah, Lisa," Mark introduced me. "This is Dr. Reed, Father's cardiologist. Doctor, this is my sister. She flew in from Portland." "Very nice to meet you." The doctor shook my hand. "Your father is stable, but we need to run several more tests. Some indicators in his blood work are atypical for a regular heart attack." "What do you mean?" I asked. "The levels of certain substances in his blood are elevated," the doctor answered, looking through the chart. "We want to rule out possible side effects from medications or other factors." "Dad takes a bunch of pills for blood pressure and cholesterol," Mark quickly interjected. "It must be that." "Possibly," the doctor nodded, but I noticed he didn't look convinced. "In any case, we'll conduct additional tests. For now, I'd recommend minimal stress. Your father needs rest." I watched the departing doctor, then turned to Mark. "What medications exactly does Dad take, and how long has he had heart problems?" "He's had blood pressure problems for the last couple of years," Mark answered, not looking me in the eye. "The doctor prescribed regular medications. Nothing special, just age taking its toll." I remembered Father as he was 4 years ago, fit, energetic, with military bearing and clear gaze. He looked younger than his years and prided himself on never taking pills. "The best medicine is discipline and proper lifestyle," he often repeated. Of course, 4 years is a long time, especially at his age, but such a drastic change seemed strange. "Father said he was tired," I informed Mark, deciding not to share my suspicions. "I'll go home, rest from the trip, and visit him again tomorrow." "You're staying at Father's house?" Concern slipped into Mark's voice. "Yes, where else? It's my home too, after all." I carefully observed my brother's reaction. Of course, it's just, no one's cleaned there in a long time. Everything's dusty. I can book you a hotel room, at my expense." "Thanks, but I prefer to stay home. Maybe I'll even clean up a bit. Dad will be pleased to return to a clean house when he's discharged." Mark frowned but didn't insist. "As you wish. I'll be working late at the office today, but I'll stop by to check on you tomorrow morning." We said goodbye, and I headed toward the hospital exit, feeling the folded sheet of paper resting in my jacket pocket, which Father had given me with such concern. What was in it? And why didn't Father want Mark to know about it? On the way home, I stopped at a small cafe to grab a bite and collect my thoughts. Settling at a far table by the window, I ordered coffee and a sandwich, and only when the waitress walked away did I carefully take out the document. It turned out to be a notarized letter dated 2 weeks earlier. In it, Father revoked the general power of attorney given to Mark and asked his old friend, lawyer Thomas Brown, to conduct a full audit of all financial operations over the past 2 years. The document was written in official tone, dry legal language, but at the bottom of the page was a note made in Father's handwriting, which I would recognize among thousands. "Mark sold the southern branch of the store without telling me. The money disappeared. I'm afraid I'm next. If something happens to me, it's no accident." I reread this phrase several times, not believing my eyes. Father suspected Mark not just of financial machinations, but of something much more serious. "I'm afraid I'm next. What could this mean?" Lost in my thoughts, I didn't notice when they brought my order. Only when the waitress asked if everything was all right did I snap out of my contemplation and hastily hid the document back in my pocket. Dinner remained almost untouched. I had lost my appetite. Dozens of questions spun in my head, with no answers. Mark, my brother, the person with whom we shared childhood and youth, could turn out to be not just dishonest in business, but... No, this was too monstrous to believe. But what if it was true? I returned to Father's house, not stopping thinking about the document in my pocket. Turning on the light in the hallway, I startled unexpectedly. From the portrait on the wall, Mom looked out, younger than I remembered her, but with the same gentle smile. My heart squeezed with longing. What would she say now? How would she act in my place? I went up to my old room, which remained almost untouched, like a museum of my teenage period. Posters of favorite bands on the walls, shelves with books, old school awards. I opened the window, letting in the cool evening air. The room smelled musty and a bit dusty. After changing into home clothes I brought with me, I went down to the kitchen to make tea. The kettle was found in its old place, as was the box of tea in the cupboard above the stove. Some habits don't change, even when families break apart. While the water was boiling, I again took out the document Father had given me and reread it in the bright light of the kitchen lamp. I'm next. What specifically did Father mean? Did he really suspect Mark was capable of... No, it's unthinkable. My brother was certainly always ambitious and sometimes selfish, but to go that far? And yet, Father's strange behavior, his obvious distrust of Mark, the documents in the safe, the warning notes on bank statements, all this formed a disturbing picture. I remembered the orange bottle of pills on Father's kitchen table that I noticed in the morning when I was looking around the house. Mark's name was on the label, but I didn't pay special attention to it then. Now, after the conversation with the doctor about strange indicators in Father's blood, this detail acquired an ominous tinge. I put the cup of tea on the table and went to the kitchen. The bottle of pills was still there, on the edge of the table, next to the salt shaker. I took it and carefully read the label. Mark Clark. Take 1 pill twice daily for high blood pressure. An ordinary heart medication prescribed to millions of people. But what if Mark was giving these pills to Father? The doctor spoke about elevated levels of certain substances in his blood. Could these pills, taken by someone they weren't prescribed to, especially at an elderly age, cause a heart attack? I'm not a pharmacist or doctor, but an inner voice suggested, yes, they could, especially if given in an increased dose. Father wrote, if something happens to me, it's no accident. Did he suspect Mark of deliberately harming his health? Or was this just paranoia of an elderly man, exacerbated by his son's financial machinations and broken trust? I took several photos of the pill bottle on my phone, then put it back in exactly the same place where it stood. If Mark was really using these pills to manipulate Father's health, I didn't want him to know about my suspicions. Sleep wouldn't come to me. I tossed and turned in my old bed, which now seemed too narrow and uncomfortable, and thought about everything I had learned during this long, eventful day. About Mom's letter, about the store's financial problems, about the mysterious document from Father, about the strangeness in Mark's behavior. Sometime around 3 in the morning, I heard the sound of the front door opening. Someone entered the house. I froze, listening to footsteps on the first floor. This could only be Mark. No one else had keys to the house, but what was he doing here at such an hour? A muffled flashlight beam flickered in the corridor, and I heard the squeak of Father's study door. Footsteps, rustling papers, the sound of drawers being pulled out. Mark was clearly looking for something, a document. But why sneak into his own house in the middle of the night with a flashlight if he could just come during the day? I quietly got up from bed and tiptoed to the door. Opening it just enough to see the stairs, I watched the weak light seeping from under the study door. After a few minutes, the light went out, the study door opened, and Mark came out into the corridor. In the dim light of the nightlight that always burned in the hallway, I saw him lock the safe behind the painting and hide something in his jacket's inner pocket. I hurried back to bed when I heard his steps on the stairs. My heart was pounding so loudly it seemed Mark should hear it even through the closed door. He stopped opposite my room, and I held my breath. The door handle slowly turned, the door opened a couple of inches. I pretended to sleep, breathing evenly and not moving, though every nerve in my body was tense. Mark stood for a few seconds, then quietly closed the door and continued down the corridor. Soon I heard the front door slam, and silence fell. In the morning, I woke to the sound of rain drumming on the eaves. For a few seconds, I tried to understand where I was. Then memories of yesterday came flooding back. I quickly dressed and went downstairs. First, I looked into Father's study. At first glance, everything looked untouched, but looking more carefully, I noticed that the folders on the desk had been rearranged and the drawers pulled out a bit further than before. I approached the safe behind the painting and entered the combination. Intuition suggested Mark wouldn't change it. Too great a risk that Father would notice. The safe opened, but inside was empty. All the documents I saw yesterday were gone. Mark had taken them. But why? If everything was as he claimed, and the store was just experiencing temporary difficulties, why such secrecy? At some point, I heard the sound of a car approaching the house. Looking out the window, I saw Mark's BMW, shiny and black as a beetle. I quickly returned to the kitchen, pretending to make breakfast. The key turned in the lock, and a minute later, Mark entered the kitchen, impeccably dressed, fresh, as if there had been no nighttime raid. "Good morning." He smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "How did you sleep in your childhood home?" "Great," I lied. "Want some coffee?" I wouldn't refuse. While I was making coffee, Mark casually chatted about the weather, about how the city had changed during my absence, about his plans to visit Father after lunch. "By the way, I stopped by the study last night, took some documents for work," he mentioned casually. "I hope you don't mind." I shrugged. "It's not my study, I'm a guest here." "Come on." Mark took a sip of coffee. "This is your home as much as mine." I looked carefully at my brother, trying to see in this elegant, confident man traces of the boy with whom we once built forts in the backyard and secretly stole cookies from Mom's jar. What had happened to him? When did ambitions eclipse everything else? "I'm going to see Father," I said, finishing my coffee. "Want to go together?" "I can't." He glanced at his watch. "Business meeting, but I'll stop by later." When Mark left, I waited for his car to drive away from the house, then took out my laptop. A hastily conducted search confirmed my suspicions. Heart medications, especially in combination and taken by someone they're not prescribed to, can cause serious health problems, including heart attacks, especially in elderly patients. I hurried to the hospital, feeling that every minute counted. What if Mark, understanding he'd been exposed, decided to get ahead of events? What if he tried to finish what he started? At the hospital, I immediately went to Father's room, but at the door, a nurse stopped me. "Excuse me, are you a relative?" she asked. "Yes, I'm Jack Clark's daughter. What happened?" "He was transferred to intensive care. His condition deteriorated sharply during the night. Everything inside me went cold." "Where is that unit? Can I see him?" The nurse explained how to get there, but warned that visits were strictly limited. I almost ran through the corridors, feeling panic squeeze my throat. What if I was too late? What if Mark somehow got to Father during the night? The intensive care unit was quiet and sterile. I found Dr. Reed at the nurse's station, studying some indicators on a monitor. "Doctor, what's wrong with my father? They told me he got worse." Dr. Reed turned to me, his face serious but not grim. "Miss Clark, yes, your father had another attack during the night, but we stabilized his condition. He's under constant observation now." "What happened? He looked better yesterday." The doctor took me aside, away from the bustling nurses. "I received additional test results," he said quietly. An abnormally high level of heart medications was found in your father's blood, which we didn't prescribe to him. In such combination, they can cause serious complications, including heart attacks. My breath caught, so I was right. Such concentration can't occur accidentally, the doctor continued, and considering that the second attack happened after your father shared his suspicions with medical staff, I was obliged to report this to the police. To the police? I felt the ground slipping from under my feet. Yes, there's suspicion that someone was deliberately introducing these medications to your father. The police want to talk to you and your brother. I took a deep breath, trying to collect my thoughts. Can I see Father? Briefly, he's weak but conscious. Father lay in a small room surrounded by monitors and IVs. He looked even more exhausted than yesterday, but seeing me, he smiled weakly. Lisa, did you read it? Yes, Dad. I know everything. Take care of yourself. Mark, Don't talk, save your strength. I took his hand. The police already know. They'll sort everything out. I sat with Father until he fell asleep, then went out to the corridor. There, a young man in plain clothes was waiting for me, introducing himself as Detective Morris. Miss Clark, could I have a word with you? We went into a small staff break room. The detective took out a notepad. Dr. Reed reported suspicious circumstances regarding your father's heart attack. Do you have any thoughts about who might wish him harm? I hesitated. Accusing your own brother of attempted murder is not a decision made lightly, but I remembered Father's exhausted face, his fear, the document with the handwritten plea for help. My brother, Mark Clark, I finally said. He had opportunity, motive, and means. I told the detective everything about the financial machinations, about the pills, about the document Father gave me, about Mark's strange behavior. The detective listened attentively, taking notes. Where is this document now? He asked when I finished. It should be here, in my coat. I reached into my pocket but found it wasn't there. Strange, I definitely put it there. Maybe I forgot it in my room. But an inner voice suggested I hadn't forgotten it anywhere. Mark, the nighttime raid, his morning, I took some documents for work. Had he searched my jacket while I slept, or found the document some other way? I have a photo of the pill bottle. I showed the detective the pictures on my phone. And I think my brother destroyed the document. He came to the house at night. Detective Morris nodded. We'll issue a warrant to search your brother's house and office. Meanwhile, we advise you to stay away from him. If your suspicions are correct, he could be dangerous. At that moment, the break room door burst open, and Mark appeared on the threshold. He looked at me and the detective with extreme surprise, quickly replaced by suspicion. What's going on? He asked, shifting his gaze from me to the detective and back. Who are you? Detective Morris. The officer stood and showed his badge. I have some questions for you, Mr. Clark. Mark paled, but quickly composed himself. Of course. How can I help? Did something happen to Father? Your father had a second heart attack, the detective replied. And there's suspicion that both attacks were caused intentionally. Mark cast a quick glance at me, in which something like panic flashed, but he instantly controlled himself. That's absurd, he said with a short, nervous laugh. Who could wish harm to my father? Perhaps someone who lost his trust? The detective asked, carefully watching Mark's reaction. Someone who used his power of attorney to embezzle money from the family business? Mark paled again, but quickly recovered. I don't understand what you're talking about. The store really had temporary financial difficulties, but we overcame everything. Ask Father. I always acted in his interests. Well, let's clarify these details at the station, the detective said. Mr. Clark, I must ask you to come with me to give a statement. Are you arresting me? Mark asked defiantly. For now, I'm just inviting you for a conversation. Or would you prefer I write an official summons? Mark seemed to deflate, his shoulders sagged, and for a moment I saw in him that confused little boy he was when Mom first went to the hospital. He looked at me with such bitter reproach that I shuddered. Do you really believe I could harm Father? My own father? I didn't know what to answer. The truth was that I wanted to believe in his innocence. Wanted to think this was some misunderstanding, that the documents had another explanation, that the pills got to Father accidentally, but all the evidence pointed in the opposite direction. I just want the truth to come out, Mark, for Father's sake. He shook his head and left the room accompanied by the detective. Through the window, I saw them walking to the police car. My brother, always so confident, now looked completely devastated. I spent the rest of the day between the intensive care unit, where Father's condition slowly stabilized, and the police station, where I gave detailed testimony. By evening, I was completely exhausted, emotionally and physically. Returning to Father's house, I found that the police had already conducted a search here. They had called and warned me about this during the day. The house was in even more disorder than before. Drawers pulled out, cabinets open, even rugs lifted at the edges. But most importantly, in the sugar bowl in the kitchen, they found crushed pills, which, according to preliminary expert conclusion, were the same heart medication whose elevated dose was found in Father's blood. I sat in the kitchen, holding my head in my hands, trying to comprehend what had happened. My brother really was slowly poisoning Father, mixing medications that cause heart rhythm disorders into his food. But why? Really for money? Or was there something more behind this? The phone ring made me jump. Detective Morris reported that Mark had confessed to everything. At first, he denied his guilt, but when shown the evidence found in the house and the results of initial examinations, he gave up and started talking. He claims he didn't want to kill Father, the detective said, only make him more compliant so he would interfere less in store affairs and not discover the financial machinations. But when he realized Father was beginning to suspect him and had gathered evidence, he panicked and increased the dose. God, I whispered, feeling nausea rise to my throat. What about the documents? The ones he took from the safe? We found everything at his house, in his safe. He didn't have time to destroy them. We also found copies of your correspondence with Father. Your brother really was intercepting all the letters. Can I see him? I don't know why I asked this. Not today. He's working with a lawyer now. Maybe tomorrow, if he agrees to a meeting. I thanked the detective and hung up. Outside, it was getting dark. I sat in the living room of my parents' house, surrounded by ghosts of the past, photographs, memorable things, memories of a once happy family. In the morning, I immediately went to the hospital. Father had been transferred back to a regular room. The crisis had passed. He looked better, though still very weak. Mark is arrested, I said, sitting on the edge of the bed. He confessed to mixing his pills into your food. Father slowly nodded. I suspected, when I found those bank statements and realized he sold the southern branch of the store without telling me, I began to notice that after every tea or coffee Mark brought me, I became lethargic, sleepy, my thoughts got confused. At first I thought, age taking its toll. He fell silent, looking out the window at the hospital courtyard where wind chased fallen leaves. Why didn't you call me earlier? I asked quietly. Father was silent for a long time, and when he finally answered, his voice sounded cracked. I thought you wouldn't want to talk to me after how I behaved at Mom's funeral, and then when you lost the baby. I wasn't there when I was needed. And then, Mark said you didn't want to have anything to do with us, that you asked him to tell me not to seek contact with you. I looked at Father in shock. I wrote to you every month for the last 4 years. The letters in your desk, unopened. What letters? I never saw them. At that moment, everything fell into place. Mark was intercepting my letters, not letting Father read them, and convincing him that I had abandoned the family. Why did he do this? I asked, stunned by my brother's betrayal. It all started after Mom's death, Father said, struggling to find words. The store was already experiencing difficulties due to competition with chain giants. I wanted to involve you, use your design ideas that Mom always talked about. Mark perceived this as betrayal. He had devoted his whole life to the store, and I suddenly wanted to divide management between you two. And instead of accepting your decision, He cut you off from me and began slowly destroying the business? Not right away. Father rubbed his nose bridge with a gesture I knew so well from childhood. At first, he really tried to save the store, took a loan for expansion, opened the southern branch. But then he met some investors, invested in construction of a residential complex, lost money, started taking new loans to cover old debts. And when did you begin to suspect? He panicked. Father sighed heavily. Started mixing those pills into my food so I would interfere less in business affairs. And when I still found the documents and tried to contact the lawyer, apparently decided to increase the dose. I sat next to Father, holding his hand, listening to this bitter story about family breakdown, about how Mark changed before his eyes, becoming more and more secretive and irritable, about how he began living beyond his means, expensive suits, a new car, frequent business trips, about how he sold the southern branch of the store without Father's knowledge and invested the money in another risky project that soon failed. I'm so sorry, Dad. I should have been nearby, should have sensed something was wrong, I said, squeezing his hand. No, Lisa. I should be asking forgiveness. He looked directly into my eyes for the first time. I was a bad father, too demanding, too strict, especially with Mark. My father raised me that way. I raised him. Thought a man needed to be kept under strict control. But watching how my strictness drove him to despair, this is the biggest lesson of my life. He squeezed my hand and continued, and you always reminded me of your mother, independent, with your own dreams. When you left, I wasn't angry because I considered you a bad daughter. I was angry because I secretly envied your courage to go your own way. I never had the bravery for that. I couldn't hold back tears. So many years of unspoken words and hurt, and here we were finally talking to each other sincerely. Will you go to see Mark tomorrow? Father asked after a long silence. I looked up in surprise. Would you want me to go? Yes. He's your brother despite everything. And my son. I'm angry with him, terribly disappointed, but... Father struggled to find words. I want to understand why. What made him go so far? The next morning I came to the station. Detective Morris escorted me to a meeting room. Mark was already waiting there, sitting at a table in an orange prison uniform that made him look like a stranger. He looked haggard, with shadows under his eyes. When I entered, he looked up. I didn't think you'd come. I sat across from him, folding my hands on the table. Father wanted me to come. Mark smiled bitterly. And you, of course, immediately rushed over. As soon as he called, "Why did you do this, Mark?" I wasn't going to waste time on mutual reproaches. Why didn't you tell Father you lost money on those investments? He would have understood. He would have helped. You think so? Mark shook his head. You remember Father. Clarks don't lose. Clarks don't complain. Clarks handle things themselves. Every day, every damn day I heard this, and when I screwed up, big time, for the first time in my life, I just couldn't tell him. He would never have forgiven me such weakness. But poisoning him? Mark, that's... I didn't want to harm him. He raised his voice but immediately controlled himself, glancing at the guard by the door. At first it was a very small dose, just so he'd be a little less nitpicking, not checking every detail in documents, not interrogating me about every decision. I thought I'd buy time to get out of trouble. And my letters? Why did you intercept them? Mark was silent for a long time, staring at the table. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded hollow. At first, I just wanted to know what you were writing. Then, I read the first letter. You wrote about your new life, about work, about friends. Father was just beginning to emerge from depression after Mom's death then. I decided your stories about how good life was without us would only upset him. I wasn't writing about how good I had it without you. I was trying to maintain a connection. I know that now. He looked up at me, his eyes full of bitterness. But then it seemed to me you had abandoned us, left me to deal with all this alone, with the store, with Father immersed in grief. And then, it became too late to change anything. Father thought you had forgotten him. You thought he wouldn't forgive you. I found myself between you and at some point began to believe it really was better that way. I looked at my brother and saw in him not a criminal, but a confused, broken person who made one wrong decision after another, sinking deeper and deeper. "What would Mom say if she saw us now?" I asked quietly. Mark flinched as if struck, his face contorted with pain. "She would have cried. She always cried when you and I fought. Remember how she used to say, 'When we're gone, you'll only have each other?'" His voice broke. "Forgive me, Lisa. I know it doesn't fix anything, but forgive me if you can." I didn't know what to answer. Part of me wanted to forgive my brother, but another part remembered Father connected to machines in the intensive care unit. His fear, his pain. I don't know, Mark. Maybe with time. But now I just want to understand. When I left the meeting room, I felt drained, but strangely more whole. As if the last piece of the puzzle had fallen into place, and I finally saw the whole picture. Not the one I would have wanted to see, but the real one. The following weeks passed as if in a fog. Father was discharged from the hospital, and I took extended leave from school to care for him. We sold Clark & Sons to cover the debts accumulated by Mark. The lawyer managed to make a deal with the prosecution. My brother pleaded guilty to financial fraud and assault on health, but not attempted murder, which significantly reduced his sentence. Father also insisted he wouldn't press personal charges, saying simply, "He's still my son." One evening, a month after all these events, Father and I sat on the porch of his house, now clean and well-maintained. I was going through old photo albums I found in the attic. We laughed at our ridiculous hairstyles, remembered long-forgotten family trips and holidays. "You know," Father said, looking at a photograph where Mark and I as children were building a sandcastle on the beach, "maybe we should start everything anew?" "What do you mean?" "Family business. Just not a store. Something new, based on your ideas." I looked at Father in surprise. "But you always said my design pursuits were frivolous." "I said a lot of stupid things." He smiled tiredly. "But I saw those sketches you made for your friend in Portland. Modern-style furniture. They're good. Very good." I blinked in confusion, not believing my ears. "But where? I never showed you." "After you moved, when you were just starting to settle in Portland, you accidentally included one of the sketches with a Christmas card. I kept it. It's in the same folder where I kept your school notebooks." I remembered how surprised I was to find my old notebooks in Father's study. It turned out he kept them there all these years for a reason. "Do you think a small design workshop could work?" I asked, feeling long-forgotten excitement kindle inside me. "With your talent and my experience? Why not?" Father winked at me. "We could call it Clark and Daughter." I laughed, but at the same time felt tears welling up in my eyes. So many years I had sought Father's approval, and now I received it when I had almost stopped hoping. 3 months later, Father had almost completely recovered. Though doctors prescribed him a gentle regimen and regular medication, real ones prescribed by a doctor. The small custom furniture workshop we founded together was already noticed by first clients. I used my design skills, combining them with Father's practical knowledge of woodworking. We called the workshop Clark and Daughter. Father insisted on this. Mark, who avoided lengthy imprisonment thanks to Father's testimony, who didn't want to completely ruin his son, began looking for work away from their family business. Perhaps out of guilt. Perhaps he wanted to do something himself. Our relationship with him was far from ideal, but we were taking the first steps toward reconciliation. The process of recovery in our family happened slowly and not without pain. I was torn between life in Portland and new obligations in Chicago. Father learned to express his emotions without hiding behind the mask of a retired military man. We discussed many things, including topics we had previously avoided: Mom's illness, my miscarriage, his loneliness after her death. Once, while going through Mom's things, we found her diary. She wrote about how proud she was of both her children's talents. how she hoped that someday we would find a way to accept and understand each other. Jack is too harsh with Mark and doesn't value Lisa's creative gift enough, she wrote. But I see how he secretly takes pride in them both. If only he could show them that. Father, after reading these lines, sat for a long time without saying a word. Then he looked up at me, tears in his eyes. She always saw us better than we really are. No, Dad, I answered, hugging him. She saw us as we could become. It was in these words that the meaning of that document Father pulled from under his pillow in the hospital was contained. It wasn't just a legal act revoking power of attorney. It was an act of returning to life, his and mine. If you enjoyed the video, please support it with a like and a comment.